Hello, everyone. This is the Ophthalmology Business Podcast, where we help you develop your ideal practice with the help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I am Narain Arulraja, the founder and one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy, www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Megan Odell, Associate Director of ASCRS Foundation, about a really important topic, and that is hiring and retention in 2023 and beyond. Hiring and retention in 2023 and beyond. Now, when Megan talks about her background, you understand why we picked this topic. She has a lot of experience in this topic. So before we jump into our conversation today on this topic of hiring and retention, why don't you take a minute, Megan? Of course, we love having you here. Take a minute to tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you? How did you get into ophthalmology? What's your story?
Thank you, Naren, so much for having me. Yes, I'm Megan Odell, and I have been in ophthalmology now for about 8 years, and in healthcare for over a dozen, and absolutely love it. Spent some time in the nonprofit side, working for some associations. I've worked in multiple different specialties, from the kind of front office stuff all the way to management and patient experience roles. Most recently worked in retina for 5 years, and am now working as a retention strategist with Magnet Culture and as the Associate Director of ASCRS Foundation.
That's awesome. So you know a lot about hiring and you know a lot about retention. So let's have some fun. Let me just jump in and let me start by asking you, what tips can you provide our practice owners, our practice administrators with regards to staffing shortages? I think COVID changed a lot of things for a lot of people, changed a lot of things for people on a personal level, and of course for practices as a consequence of that. Hiring and keeping people is tough. So staffing shortage is a reality pretty much for most ophthalmology practices.
Yeah, and the expectation of the employee in these situations now in a post-pandemic world is this expectation of a work-life balance. And so we had, even though healthcare was a little bit different in that we still showed up to work, we had a lot of people that were laid off or were sent into remote work, especially if you had people working in call centers that didn't physically have to be in the clinic settings, and they got used to that. And that expectation was that that was still going to stay the same in a post-pandemic world. And we know from healthcare that most of our care has to be delivered in an in-person basis. And so we saw a lot of shift happening from employees that were previously in healthcare and specifically in ophthalmology leave that field and switch industries almost exclusively. And so what we have to do is get creative with how can we make sure that the members of our team have that work-life balance, that they feel appreciated, that they feel part of something bigger than themselves. And I think we naturally get to do that in healthcare, and that's where we get that leg up. But we've also got to add in and sprinkle that extra piece of culture that makes it so unique that they want to be part of those teams and they want to stay working in ophthalmology.
Yeah, so piggybacking on what you just said, two follow-up questions. The first one is purpose, right? You kind of alluded to this. I mean, in healthcare, you can save someone's eyesight, you can, make a difference in their life, right? So I assume for a lot of people, especially the young people, like having a meaning, having purpose, making a difference goes a long ways. How would you build on it? How would you, accentuate it? So that's one of the questions I have. And the second one is, you touched on culture. Maybe you can talk about or give me some examples of how to kind of make it come alive, in the context of shortages.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting pieces that I find a lot of practices miss is allowing the team members, because a lot of the people that we work with and that work for us are much younger, and they don't typically come in with an eye problem or have had any visual issues themselves. So it's really hard to say, I know what it feels like to not be able to see, or to be scared to drive, or to not see my grandkids play soccer anymore. And those are the pieces of the patients that we're treating. That's why that vision is so important to us. And so there's a couple things that I like to do with my team members, and it's to try to put them in the patient's shoes. So if you're not already doing this with any of your team members or new hires when they join your practice, is to have them go through a patient experience. There are several tools out there. We use some goggles that you can put on, and there's different interchangeable lenses where they can see what a patient with cataracts is experiencing, or a patient with diabetic retinopathy is experiencing, or a patient with age-related macular degeneration, and what that looks like through their lens. And so when you're training your teams and your front desk staff on how to interact with these patients, simple things like, oh, next over here, can't resonate with the patient when they can't see where you are. And so encouraging and training your teams to get up and walk over to some of your patients that are visually impaired is super, super critical. It also gives them another insight and empathy level to say, wow, that must be really frustrating. I know how hard that must be. And they can just better understand what that patient might be going through, and having them go through that full experience. So the goggles is one piece of it, but they can also call into the office. What does it feel like when a patient calls in to even schedule an appointment? Are their expectations set? Do they know it's going to be 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours? Are they going to be dilated? What does that mean? Can I drive afterwards? Like, all of those kinds of things, are those explained, and are the expectations of what that new patient should experience, are they set from the very beginning? So running through that whole patient experience, and then have them actually walk through your front doors. Are they greeted? Do they feel warm? Do they feel welcomed? Have them go through some of the visual acuity processes. You don't have to dilate them, but have them sit down. Are they getting explained what each piece of equipment looks like? Have them sit in the exam room, wait for a physician. This is a great time for them to meet one of your physicians. A lot of times our physicians don't meet our staff until they're thrown on our teams. So this is a really good opportunity for your physicians to meet some of your new hires too, just by having them go through a full patient experience. I've also encouraged my physicians to say, hey, come shadow me in surgery. I think it's a great learning opportunity for your teams to feel what that looks like for the family members and for that patient. And then to, of course, get to engage in the joy and the outcome of that vision being repaired or restored in a post-surgical setting. And so being able to walk through that entire patient journey is super, super powerful. So the more you can engage your teams in all aspects of what a patient is going through, the more engaged they're going to be with your mission on saving and restoring sight, and the more they're going to be empathetic towards your patients who are going through some very scary times.
That's awesome tips. So thank you so much for that. Let me kind of switch gears. We talked about culture. We talked about, through patient experience, helping your, team members understand your patients, given that most of the team members are younger versus the patients are older. So they may not have the same eye-related challenges that the patients are having. All those are wonderful tips. But what if you have a key employee, somebody who's important, who is toxic? Like, I'm putting you on the spot. What will you do?
Yeah. This is a tough one, because I think if we all really dig deep down, there's always that one or two people that tend to be the one that you hear the most complaints about, or people are always stepping on eggshells every time they're around those people, or you're scared to deliver news to that group of people or that particular person, because you're going to get some sort of backlash. And, and part of my work is also as a retention strategist with Magnet Culture, is that we teach you've got to either coach them up or coach them out. And we've oftentimes these people have probably just skated through the office and made it year after year because they were never counseled, or they were never given the feedback on how their behavior is negatively affecting the team or the patients or the culture, right? And so if you have to kind of take a deep dive look into your why, does everybody on your team know what the why is, why we're here and what we do? And if that particular person can't seem to fit on that why, then we need to coach them into what the expectations are. And we have to have the hard conversations. We have to give the feedback to say, hey, Sally, that behavior is negatively affecting this because of that. And this is what I need you to work on so that we can get our job done, because we're here for the patients, right? And so just kind of relating all of that back to the patients at the end of the day, but you have to start with the feedback. And sometimes as managers, we don't want to give the hard feedback. We don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations, especially with the toxic people, because we know they're going to fire back. And so just to have all of the documentation kind of ready, but not saved up to where you can lay it all out at one time, because they're not going to respond to that either. But as situations come up, to have that one-on-one conversation and say, hey, can you help me understand why you responded this way, or why you handled a situation that way? And then coach them into a way that might be better for them to respond or react in the future. And if they don't do it that way, then you have to have that conversation again. And so they'll soon understand that, hey, that attitude and that response is not fitting with the culture of this company, and I'm just not going to work out here. And they'll either self-eliminate, or you will have enough documentation that you will be able to just release them to the industry, as I like to say, to where they can go work somewhere else. Because what will happen is your new hires, who will be great people for your team, will get ran off by some toxic people, and they won't have that opportunity to grow in your organization. You will lose them to your competitors.
Makes sense. So you're saying one bad apple could, ruin the entire basket of apples.
It often does. And sadly, sometimes it takes that hard lesson learned where you start losing a couple good people before you really start focusing on those pieces. And so if you're not sure who the bad apple is now, start interviewing your staff, start asking questions. What is it about your job you enjoy? Just asking those questions, right? Having the one-on-ones to make sure that everybody on the team feels part of a team. If there's one thing about your job you don't like, what is it? And if you start seeing a same name or a same trend coming up, then that should be a focus point for management to take a look at. So it might be a procedure, it might be working hours, it might be a particular supervisor, it might be a coworker, it might be a physician. And so finding out what it is and how we can work through that, because again, even if it's a physician, you might not be able to fire them, but they might need some coaching, or they're going to continue to run off people on their team.
Makes total sense. Let me ask you the third questions. As we are recording this, 2023 is upon us, perhaps a challenging year in front of us. I mean, as if like COVID and the years after that were not challenging enough. What recruitment strategies are working in this environment? And as you look into the rest of 2023, what do you think will work in 2023 and beyond?
That's the million-dollar question, Aaron, of what's going to work, what's not going to work. Some of the best recruitment strategies that we've seen effective time and time again is the power of word of mouth. And so your internal referrals, so your rock star people that love their job and show up and do a really great job. Those are the people that we want to say, hey, I need more people like you. And so encouraging those internal referral bonuses we're still seeing those very effective. They're ranging in pay between $250 and $1,000 typically. But referral bonuses are really great. And to not underestimate any application. So even though you may see some gaps in employment when you're reviewing applications, or you may see someone that doesn't have any ophthalmology experience, to be honest, some of my most successful, great employees have been ones with zero ophthalmology experience, but they have customer service, and they've either worked in retail or worked at a Starbucks, or they've dealt with people. And if you know how to do that, then you can deliver great care. So we can teach the technical components, because every office, if we all dig down deep, we all function a little differently. We have different workflows, we have different expectations. We have different doctors in the same office that do different workflows. And so we still need to be able to teach our team members and our new team members our expectations, but we can't teach them how to be professional. That characteristic trait has to already be born in them. And so making sure they already have exposure in that kind of hospitality industry, in that customer service industry, those are going to be some great candidates to seek and get them trained with your systems and with healthcare once they're on board.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you talked about recruitment strategies, I love, the word of mouth. I loved your tip around, hiring from outside of ophthalmology, especially with the right background, like retail, Starbucks, etc., who love customer service, people who love customer service. Megan, I have a question. I'm sure you have heard of Glassdoor reviews. What are your thoughts on Glassdoor? And, as a, let's say a leader of a practice, should you pay attention? How would you handle it?
Yeah, such a great question, and one that I, don't see a lot of practices paying attention to. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. So Glassdoor, for those of you that may not know, is a tool that candidates go to use in order to find out if it's a great place to work. So just like your patients go to Google or to Healthgrades or to Vitals to find out if it's a good doctor or a good office, your candidates are going to places like Glassdoor or LinkedIn or even Facebook pages and Indeed to find out how your company is rating. And so what I encourage you to do, if you're listening right now and don't know what that rating is, go to those sites right now. You will have a company page and see where you're at. And you might be kind of shocked to see maybe how low you're rating. Because oftentimes when an employee who leaves your place of employment is upset or frustrated, that's where they will go to leave that feedback. And so it's really important to monitor that. And if your score is low, you have a low star rating. So just like Google, it's a star rating scale. If that star rating is low, I encourage you to ask some of your key team members, because you can have current employees leave feedback, and that will help get that score up. And then kind of monitor that over the quarters as you head into 2023 on trying to get that rating up, because that will oftentimes help recruit better people to come to your site to apply for jobs as they're open. And if you start asking some of your candidates how they heard about their job, you will probably start hearing, oh, I saw it on Indeed, and the first thing I did was I went to Glassdoor to see how your ratings were. And people said they loved it here, or they said you had great benefits, or they said their manager was super awesome. They'll start sharing that feedback, and you'll really start to see the impact of why those reviews are so important. So just like you focus on having those 4 and 5 star reviews for your physicians and for your physical clinic locations and that patient experience, you want to make sure for good retention that you have that good experience for the employee side as well.
Are there any mistakes you see people making in recruitment? I know I'm putting you on the spot again.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that, having done it for a while, you're like,
So I think providing a realistic preview of the job is sometimes you find hiring managers are like, oh, well, don't tell them it's like, 8 to 7 because they're not going to want to work it. Just tell them it's 8 to 5 and we'll just throw them in the fire later. That is not a good idea. I think it's very good to be as transparent as possible. Otherwise, you will not have a candidate that this fits with. So people often are looking for that work-life balance, or they're planning their kids' activities or daycare schedules around their work schedule. And if they're expected that they're off by 5:30 and daycare closes at 6, they can't stay till after 6. And so now you kind of have this internal conflict of, are they really here to work? Do they even care? Or do they have other priorities? And their other priorities are just because the expectation of the job wasn't told to them as clear as it actually is. Another thing I see is that employers will conveniently bring a team member on for an interview at like 2 o'clock, where you don't have a lot of traffic. It's a good time in the day. And that's not a realistic commute for that new candidate. And so I encourage you to have those interviews at 8 a.m. See if that candidate can show up on time for the interview, and that commute and that traffic actually works for them. So even though on the phone they may say, oh yeah, it's really not that far, I don't mind the drive, it's great to go ahead and get them to have that realistic preview before you even offer the job. The other thing you can do is throw them into a working interview. Have them shadow some people on the team. Let them be on their feet, especially if you work in a busy clinic. Can they keep up with the pace? If travel's required, tell them that. Explain if there's reimbursement for mileage, or if you have company vehicles, or how that might work, so that they know, okay, some days might be 12-hour days, but I'm also going to be off on a different day during the week. And so setting realistic expectations, I think, is the one thing that we tend to not want to share, because we want to get them in the door, but that will actually just run them out. So you've spent all this time recruiting them, getting them in, getting them onboarded, and then they end up not even making it to their 90 days.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. Thank you so much for that. we know how powerful appreciation and recognition is, especially when it comes to retention, which is the second part of our topic.
Mhm.
What ideas do you have for our listeners, in general, in special, celebratory times like Christmas, New Year, etc.? But what are your thoughts on this appreciation and recognition?
Yeah, so I think it's one that we all might think we're doing really well, and we may know our people, but if you don't already kind of know a little bit about people on your team, there's those kind of old-fashioned, get to know you sheets or my favorite things, and you can put a list of all kinds of questions on there, like their favorite soda drink or their favorite Starbucks order or their favorite candle scent or whatever it might be. So you have an idea of a little bit about the people on your team, and you can use that throughout the year for birthdays or anniversaries or special holidays. But I think oftentimes we try to say, okay, our team's worked really hard. Friday, let's have a pizza party. And what happens is you think that most of your team will feel appreciated because you're buying them lunch. They didn't have to pay for anything. But what about the people on your team who don't like pizza? Right? They're not going to feel appreciated that you did this nice gesture, so you thought, because it's not something that either they can enjoy for dietary reasons, or that they just don't like. And so I think it's important to make sure that when we're trying to do appreciation and recognition, that we're trying to meet the needs of different people. Because again, a lot of people in our workforce now are part of that kind of Gen Z generation, and they want a voice, they want to be heard, and they want to be respected and appreciated for the things that make them feel appreciated. And so asking your team members, hey, how do you like to be appreciated? Certain people on your team don't want to be highlighted at the staff meeting. They don't want their name in the newsletter or on a bulletin board. They just want a simple thank you card that maybe you drop in the mail. And so one of the things I've liked to encourage my physicians to do is to mail a card home to somebody on their team that just says, hey, thanks so much for all your help. I can see how hard you're working. It really helps me take care of patients when you're always on top of your game or whatever it is. And there's nothing better than getting a note home from someone who is your boss or your peer or your supervisor that says, I see you and I appreciate you. So don't underestimate getting a stack of some thank you cards off of Amazon and scheduling some time, especially if you're in a management or a leadership role, to send those out on a weekly or biweekly basis, all for about a 60-cent stamp. So it can go a really long ways.
Yeah, so you're saying appreciation, and it's genuine appreciation, right? So the more specific it is, saying thank you is one thing, but I really like the way you did this. So I really appreciate you, doing this or staying there. Like, so I think then they feel like, I think it's like people want to be seen or, be noticed. So the fact that you are paying attention and that they know that they're making a difference can go a long way. So that's a wonderful, wonderful suggestion. On your point about some may like pizza, some may not. So I guess what I got out of this is you are saying when you give something that they like, they're going to appreciate it even more.
Mhm.
Like I like, red velvet cake. So when you give me red velvet cake, it's 3 times better than any
Exactly.
other cake, because for me,
Exactly.
that's my favorite. And the
Right.
fact that you remember it and you went out of the way to get it on my birthday, I'm just making it up. I'm not
Right.
asking you to give me a red velvet cake, but you'll remember that, right? You're like, wow,
That's
this person like went out of the way and I'm important to them. Therefore, like we give it back. We provide that kindness back.
And in management and leadership roles, it's tough because everybody has different favorites. Everybody has different things that they like. And I know it seems easier in management if we just, well, let's just bundle it all together and they'll all feel appreciated. But the truth is, you're right about even as simple example as the birthday cake. They're going to feel more seen and more appreciated if we just go a little bit extra on that mile and make sure that we get something that truly does meet their needs. And we have a lot to worry about in management. We have our own jobs to do, but we also have to cater to the needs of all the people on our teams. And so making sure you have some sort of social committee or somebody who loves to do events and appreciation things, let them take some of this stuff on so you don't feel like it's on your plate, but they can help you make sure that your employees and the people on your team feel seen and feel heard, and most importantly, they feel appreciated.
Absolutely. As we come to a close, I want to talk about culture. We all know culture is important. You started with that, at the very start of this conversation. But when it comes to retention, is positive culture important, and why and how?
Yeah, so culture is the hardest piece because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it's something that we have to pour into day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. It just takes a lot of time to get that foundation built, and it does start with the leadership. The leadership has to be on board with that change. So if the rule is, hey, we're not going to allow those toxic people in our building, then some department can't say, well, I need them here and just leave them there, because it's not going to change the overall culture. So it has to be a synced, agreed upon kind of cadence of what's going to be tolerated, what's not. And that goes back to your core values. So if you haven't taken a look at your core values recently of your organization and your mission and vision and what you stand for, I recommend starting there to make sure, are we still going down the path of what we expect? And are we willing to hold one of our employees to this standard of this core value means this, and if you don't meet it, then you get written up or you get terminated? And are we willing to put our foot down for that? And do we agree on that from a management standpoint? And, as far as just overall culture, there's a lot of pieces. Making sure people are kind of all on the same page. They're there for the same mission, their same why. They feel appreciated. They feel part of the team. And lots and lots of transparent communication. And I think even sometimes in management, we don't know what's going on or what we need to say or when the change is going to happen or what's going to happen legislatively or why we have to build something that way. And I think it's okay to tell our teams, I don't know, or we're looking into this, or, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. What questions do you already have? Or we need to change softwares, or we need to start doing something this way. And just making sure we're engaging our team members in those decision processes and not keeping that in a siloed management top-down approach, more of this bottom-up approach. You're going to get more buy-in and more participation when you do have to do a top-down push, because you've already engaged the frontline staff. So just asking our frontline staff how they feel about something, what's going on, tapping into them, surveying them, responding to the survey, and taking that action will start building a culture of, hey, we see you, we appreciate you, and we need you part of this team.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Megan. I learned a lot from you today. You know a lot, you know your stuff, and I think it shows. So appreciate all the time you spent with us today, all your wisdom. And I think you are distilling what you have learned, like you said, over a long time. So this is awesome. Thank you so much. If someone wants to get to know you or meet you, can we include any kind of information along with the podcast, or do you want to share it?
Yeah, you guys can follow me on LinkedIn at Megan Odell, and we can share that or put up a QR code or something like that. But yeah, I would love to connect and happy to answer any other questions if you just shoot me a message on there.
Perfect. Thank you again for your time today. I also want to take a moment to thank every one of our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing you all an amazing week ahead. Your host, Narain Arul Raja.